all around me, I see madness. I just don't really understand what's going on. This cancel culture, this wokery, it flies in the face of common sense. I mean, why isn't Piers Morgan allowed to doubt some of the things Meghan Markle said? I mean, I'm not going to get involved in that, but it's up to him if he wants to say, I don't believe what she was saying. Why does he have to lose his job? Why does a man from the Society of Editors, who said that when Meghan charged Fleet Street with being racist, that she ought to provide some evidence, that guy had to resign from his position as the General Secretary of that august body for saying that? What's unreasonable about saying, well, if you want to call me a racist, could I please have the evidence? Why is that a sacking offence? So he had to resign, and then Winston Marshall, was the banjo player in Mumford & Sons, praised a book that was right-leaning. It was actually about the scourge of cancel culture. He praised it publicly and basically had to leave the band. I mean, this is crazy. And then we've got the First Minister of Wales, Mark Drakeford, saying he's considering curfewing all men at 6 p.m. in Wales to protect women when they're on the streets. We've got a peer of the realm, Jenny Jones, Baroness Jones, saying that men should be locked indoors after 6 p.m. This is not, I mean, I'm not trying to diminish the genuine concerns and fear of women in the wake of the Sarah Everard case, but these are not sensible responses. These are crazy responses. Let's talk to the editor of Spiked Online, Brendan O'Neill. Evening, Brendan.
Hi, Kevin.
Do you take my point? I just feel we're being more and more oppressed by a kind of swirling mass of insanity. This country used to be renowned for its moderation, for its reason, for its calm. I mean, we went through probably one of the worst situations that any population had ever had to put up with, the sustained bombing of the Second World War, and we took it with stoicism. Now we fly off the handle and come up with ridiculous responses to virtually everything. I mean, what is going on, do you think?
I completely agree. I think we're living through waves of hysteria. You know, a wave of hysteria rises and then it crashes, and then we get another one, you know, going right back to the Black Lives Matter protests of last year, which gave rise to lots of hysteria about offensive culture and offensive statues, you know, through to all the cancel culture incidents that we've been experiencing in recent weeks, the ones you mentioned this week. Now we have another wave of hysteria around the Meghan Markle stuff. You know, we're all supposed to bow down to Saint Meghan, the patron saint of wokeness, and anyone who blasphemes against her will be cast out of polite society. It's just never ending. And whenever a crazy cancel culture episode finishes, another one takes its place. So there's these waves of hysteria, like a malarial fever washing over society. And I think a lot of people are starting to get worried about all this.
Well, I'm worried about it. I mean, admittedly, this was in America, but as the Americans have gathered around Meghan's story, they now feel that we in Britain are all a bunch of racists. I mean, they can talk. It's a much more racist country over there than it is here. But one of the bits of evidence used to back up Meghan's claim that Britain is a racist nation and the press is racist was a headline that used the word niggling. Which apparently, I looked it up, is actually a Scandinavian word, but because niggling sounds slightly like the N-word, that was seen to be a racist headline. Now, that is the kind of madness that is beginning to permeate Britain, I think. Do you agree?
Absolutely. That's a really good example of what we're talking about, because anyone who understands anything about the English language or who simply has access to a dictionary will know that the word niggling means annoyance. It means being annoyed, feeling annoyed. That's all that it means. It has nothing to do with the N word, which every normal person agrees is a horrific word. So when you have to go looking for that kind of coverage, when you're so desperate to prove that the British media is racist and that everyone's criticism of Meghan Markle was racist, when you're so desperate to prove that you have to pull out the word niggling and hold that up as proof of racism, then you know how desperate this is. You know how cynical this is. These are people really scouring the media for anything they can hold up as proof of racism in order to cancel people. And I think what's happened this week in particular, this week has been a particularly crazy week because we've seen numerous people cancelled. You mentioned Winston Marshall of Mumford & Sons cancelled simply for saying he liked a book. He liked a book. He liked a book that was critical of Antifa, the so-called anti-fascist movement, who are actually a bunch of thugs. Piers Morgan was cancelled for daring to blaspheme against Saint Meghan. Ian Murray of the Society of Editors, who you mentioned, that to me was the most shocking, because all that he did was stand up for his industry that he is supposed to represent. He stood up for his industry, the press, against these two pampered, privileged, millionaire victim culture people in America, Harry and Meghan, who were saying that the British media is awash with racism. He defended his industry and he was forced out as a result. So the culture of censorship and the culture of cancellation is getting worse and worse.
Now, also, intemperance seems to have become our currency. It used to be very different in this country. It used to be almost boringly moderate about everything, almost boringly reasonable in all situations. So we have the Sarah Everard case, really shocking, awful. I totally understand that women are traumatized by this. We clearly have a problem of male predators on the streets. Something needs to be done. But I don't think the situation is helped when Baroness Jones, one of this nation's lawmakers entrusted with making our laws, stands up in the House of Lords and actually says that she proposes a 6 p.m. curfew for all men so that women may walk the streets in safety. All men to be locked indoors after 6 o'clock at night. That is another example of rank insanity, isn't it?
It's completely insane. And, I'm really worried about the Sarah Everard case. Firstly, there is the incident itself, which is just unspeakably awful, and we're all expecting to hear the worst in relation to what this suspect did. We're prepping ourselves for that. It just sounds completely and utterly horrific. But the truth of the matter is that this kind of crime, where a woman is kidnapped and killed, presumably, it's really, really rare. And what we've seen over the past few days, I think, including from lots of feminists, is a new culture of fear. They're spreading this fearful message that women are not safe on the streets of Britain, that all men are a threat, that you can't go out at night without being harassed. You can't go out at night without being stalked by a crazy bloke. I mean, they are exaggerating the problem, and that doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help anyone to turn a terrible, terrible incident like this, a mercifully rare incident like this, into a story about how awful men are, how dangerous British streets are, and how victimized women are. I think people are politicizing this awful crime, and that's not benefiting anyone. And the idea of a curfew against men is completely and utterly nuts. And, Mark Drakeford made a similar point. They want to get men off the streets. I bet they don't mean, refuse collectors or men who clean the streets or firemen who keep people safe. What are they talking about here? Who do they really want off the streets? And do they really think this stuff is workable? This is how crazy our society has become when these kinds of ideas can be floated in public life.
And what do you think's going on? Is it that there are extremists out there, extreme wokery people, woke warriors, extreme feminists, who are sort of waiting to seize on any of these issues and to make a mountain out of a molehill? Piers Morgan, old friend of mine, by the way, was partly dismissed, if you like, because 41,000 people got in touch with Ofcom. Now, that was clearly an organised campaign. They bombarded ITV on Twitter with "get that guy out, get that guy out." So these are organised campaigns, and I think it's extremists who grab these issues that concern everyone and try to sort of light the blue touch paper and turn them into kind of destructive situations.
That's right. And it is a bunch of noisy extremists. It's a small number of people, but they wield a lot of influence. They wield a lot of influence because they are in the media. They are sometimes in political life. They're sometimes members of parliament or members of the House of Lords. So they have a disproportionate influence on public life with their crazy ideas. The other problem is that there is not enough pushback from
Yeah.
other kinds of politicians. Where's the government? Where's the government saying, listen, these are the facts about abduction. These are the facts about murder. You don't have to worry. The streets are safe for women. The streets are safe for men. Of course, crime occurs, and of course, we're all completely disgusted by it when it does occur. But this is a pretty safe country. This is a good country in which to be a woman. Where is the politician making that point? Where are the politicians defending the right of people to go about their business and not to feel fearful and scared every time they go outside? So there's not enough pushback from politicians who claim to be sensible, who claim to be on the side of reason. They ought to be standing up to cancel culture. They ought to be standing up to the politics of fear, and they ought to be putting the case for the fact that Britain is a good country. It's a safe country. It's not a racist country. And those are things we should celebrate.
Also, corporations, I think, need to stand up to some of these situations as well. I mean, ITV, in my view, should have turned around and said, we don't agree with Piers Morgan's stance on this, but he has a right, he has freedom of speech, we have vaguely freedom of expression in this country, and we're going to stand by him. But, of course, because he was being attacked on the sacred ground, the sacrosanct territory of racism and mental health, ITV buckled immediately and effectively sacked him.
That's right. And apparently what they said to him is, you need to apologise on air for your comments about Meghan, or else there'll be trouble. So, this was almost Stalinist. They were asking him to take part in a public retraction, a public act of self-flagellation for the speech crime of criticising or doubting Saint Meghan, the patron saint of wokeness. So they completely caved to the mob. They caved to this organised Ofcom complaints, and they shouldn't have. And the more that corporations buckle, the more problematic this culture will become. And you see that all the time. There are groups like Stop Funding Hate. Stop Funding Hate is this painfully middle-class campaign group that wants to deprive supposedly controversial magazines and broadcasters of advertising and funding. So they go online and they target advertisers and big business and say, do you really want to advertise with this magazine? Do you really want to advertise with this radio station? And too often those corporations, those advertisers, they buckle under pressure. In response to 7 tweets or 12 tweets or whatever else it might be. What they ought to do is stand up and say, listen, we're not going to be dictated to by small, intolerant mobs. We're going to advertise with whoever we want, and we're going to associate with whoever we want. So what we need is a bit of spine in British life. We need a bit of backbone, and we need to stand up to the cancel culture mobs and face them down.
Couldn't agree more, Brendan. As always, very wise words. Thank you so much for your time. Brendan O'Neill there, editor of Spiked Online, talking about this scourge of wokery. It really is taking a grip. And I think Brendan and I both agree. What do you think? I think it's turning this country crazy.